You won't believe how my life took a sharp turn the moment I realized I wasn't just another girl in a small suburban town, but a ghost in my own family's home. My name is Alexa, I'm 26 years old, and I grew up in a neighborhood called Green Valley, near the outskirts of Denver, Colorado. If you ever come across a pretty picture of a modest brick house with trimmed hedges and a wide driveway, you might think of it as the embodiment of the American dream. That's exactly what my childhood home looked like from the outside. Pretty, calm, and welcoming. Yet inside those walls I was invisible, an afterthought next to my younger brother, Colin, who lit up our parents' eyes simply by existing. When I was 8, I started noticing how Mom and Dad, Martha and Ethan, showered Colin with praise over the smallest accomplishments, while the things I worked hard for were treated like passing weather. Colin scored a goal in gym class, Mom would say, her voice brimming with pride, as though he had won the Olympics. Meanwhile, I came home beaming about a perfect score on a science quiz, only to hear, "That's nice, Alexa, but keep it down," Colin studying for his math test, from Dad. It was as if I was an accessory they appreciated for about 5 seconds before remembering the star of the family needed his spotlight back. Our family unit was small, just the 4 of us. We had a cat named Pepper who sometimes crawled into my room as if she sensed I needed company. Yet in that house, every passing day reminded me of how unevenly love and attention could be distributed between 2 siblings. Picture this: a quiet Saturday morning, me finishing laundry and trying to impress Mom by neatly folding clothes and cleaning the bathroom, only to have her brush by and say, "Did you see Colin's drawing? He's so talented." I'd look at the neat piles of clothes in my hands and wonder, what does it take to be noticed around here? I remember the day it truly sank in. I was about 11, Colin was 8, and our parents came to see the local talent show at the community center. I'd spent weeks preparing a simple violin piece, practicing every day after school to make sure I got every note right. When I walked on stage, I saw them sitting in the 4th row, wearing polite smiles. I performed, heart thumping in my chest, adrenaline coursing through me. At the end, I saw a lukewarm clap from Dad and a small wave from Mom. Then, during intermission, Colin told them he wanted to go out for ice cream. They jumped up, excited, as if he'd made a groundbreaking request. "We need to leave early," Mom whispered to me. "Your brother's got a craving and we don't want the shop to close." They vanished. I stood there alone in a half-lit auditorium, listening to the next participant on stage. Ice cream trumped my performance. That day, I realized I was always going to lose against my brother. Still, I tried to bury the hurt. I refused to believe my parents could be so blatantly unfair. I thought, maybe if I just do better they'll see me too. In middle school, I earned straight A's, stayed out of trouble, and even joined the soccer team, though I wasn't great at sports. The teachers called me diligent, but at home, the word was overshadowed by, "Colin is more creative." He started painting random landscapes, mountains, fields, even one of a local pond he visited on a field trip. Mom would pin these paintings on every wall in the house. I'd come home, scanning for any sign of my achievements on the fridge or living room shelves, but all I'd see were Colin's pictures taped up like museum exhibits. Time flew, and by high school I'd learned to live with the imbalance. I studied until midnight, finished my chores on time, and tried not to complain. Meanwhile, Colin continued to shine. He was decent in sports, somewhat talented in art, and more social than I ever was, so he got invited to parties, had girlfriends, and always had something going on that captured Mom and Dad's attention. On the nights we actually ate dinner together, the conversation was 70% about Colin, 20% about what Dad did at work, 10% about random topics like weather and the neighbor's new fence. My name rarely crossed anyone's lips unless it involved me doing something for Colin. "Alexa, could you tutor your brother in math? Alexa, can you drive him to practice? Alexa, your brother forgot his lunch. Bring it to him on your way." By my junior year, I knew more about being Colin's personal assistant than about being a daughter. I guess you could say I was numb, clinging to a hope that maybe on some milestone like my graduation they'd finally notice me. I remember the day my acceptance letter arrived from the University of Colorado Boulder. It was a decent scholarship for business administration, something I'd worked insanely hard for. I'd taken extra classes, done volunteer work, tried to create the perfect application so my parents would be proud. When I showed Mom the letter, she gave a quick nod. "That's wonderful, Alexa, we're happy for you," she said. Then she turned to Dad. "Did you buy the new soccer cleats for Colin yet? He needs them by next week." Any excitement I felt evaporated. I was once again the second thought. But I remained determined, clinging to the faint belief that maybe my graduation day would be that shining moment when they'd celebrate me. Graduation arrived. The morning was a blur of black gowns, excitement, last-minute instructions from teachers, and the hum of proud families gathering. I looked everywhere for Mom and Dad, but they arrived late. Dad held a small bouquet of wilting carnations, which he said they bought at a grocery store discount bin. Mom patted my shoulder and said, "We're so proud, honey," in a tone that lacked any real passion. Then Dad spotted Colin waving from across the lawn. Apparently, my brother showed up too, wearing a grin. But the next thing I knew, Dad was guiding them over to talk with some neighbor about a soccer scholarship Colin might go for next year. I spent a good hour taking pictures with friends and teachers alone. Then I found my parents when it was time to leave. I half expected them to suggest we go have a celebratory lunch, or even a small dessert. But Dad simply asked, "So, are you heading home now? We need to take Colin to his friend's place. He's got a graduation party of his own to attend." My insides twisted, but I forced a smile. "Sure. I'll just go home by myself. See you later." The day ended with me eating a stale donut alone in my car, letting tears stream down my cheeks, telling myself it would be the last time I felt so disappointed. Time trudged on. I left for college, living on campus, juggling a part-time job at a bookstore to cover what the scholarship didn't. My parents rarely called to ask how I was doing. Instead, they'd ask me if I could Venmo some cash to Colin because he ran short on lunch money. Or, "Alexa, can you come home this weekend to help move some furniture? Colin's busy with a project." It was as if I existed solely to support him. I tried ignoring it. I told myself that once I graduated from college, got a real job and moved away, I'd be free from their expectations. But freedom is rarely that simple. When I graduated college, and again they barely acknowledged it, I landed a position in a startup in downtown Denver. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me some independence. I found a tiny studio apartment with leaky pipes but a gorgeous view of the distant mountains. I breathed easier there. Nobody pounded on my door, demanding I do anything for them. For the first time I could decorate a place the way I liked, read books late into the night without hearing Dad say, "Go to bed, you need to be up early to drive Colin." I had a glimmer of what life could be, if only my parents saw me as an individual and not just a caretaker for Colin. I was almost content, until the day I got a text from Dad. "Colin's college graduation party this Saturday at Diamond Crest Restaurant. Bring a gift, please." That was it. No greeting, no "how are you?" or "we'd love to see you." Just an order. I stared at the phone, my body rigid with old anger. Colin was graduating from an arts program at a local college. Mom and Dad were so proud of him that they booked the entire restaurant for over 60 guests, or so I'd heard from a cousin. Meanwhile, back on my graduation day, I couldn't even get them to take me out for a meal. My chest felt tight, my mind swirling. How could I still let them control me like this? I decided not to let them walk all over me again. So I made a plan which was petty, but after years of feeling sidelined, I felt justified. I bought a fancy laptop, a top-of-the-line brand, for $1,500, the kind Colin had once mentioned he'd love to use for his digital art. I had it gift-wrapped with a giant silver bow. I showed up at the party, gift in hand, arriving exactly on time in a room bustling with relatives, neighbors and friends. Laughter, chatter, clinking glasses filled the space. I stepped inside and instantly felt the usual wave of estrangement. No one greeted me, not even Mom, who was too busy fussing over Colin's suit. I approached a table near the front. Everyone seemed to be in on a conversation about Colin's future job prospects. I felt like an intruder at my own brother's celebration, so I politely asked a waiter if there was any seat available. He checked a list, gave me an apologetic frown, and said they were all reserved. I saw an empty chair next to Colin but realized, from the place cards, it was meant for some friend of his who hadn't arrived yet. Before I could say anything, Mom spotted me, eyes flicking to the box in my hands. "Oh, Alexa, you're here," she said in a clipped tone. "You brought a present for Colin, right?" I forced a small smile. "Yes, I did." She exhaled in relief, like she was worried I might embarrass them by showing up empty-handed. I turned to find Dad, or at least get a seat, but it was clear they hadn't even considered where I'd sit. Dad was deep in conversation with Uncle Theo, bragging about how Colin's art portfolio was going to land him a big opportunity. So I just stood there, hugging the box, feeling the sharp sting of being overlooked yet again. Finally, I took a steadying breath, walked toward Colin, and said loudly enough for everyone to pause their chatter, "Colin, this is for you. Hope it helps with your work." Heads turned, eyes glinting with curiosity. I handed him the silver-wrapped box. Colin's face lit up as he tore off the wrapping and saw the gleaming laptop. "Wow," he breathed. "This is amazing, Alexa, thank you so much." Mom beamed at me with that smug gratitude that felt more like self-congratulation. Her daughter had come through, just as expected. Then with a calm voice I said, "Actually, I've changed my mind. I'd like to return it." The entire room fell silent, jaws dropping as I motioned to the stunned waiter standing by. "Sir," I said to the waiter, "I need to cancel this purchase. I'm returning it effective immediately." He blinked, unsure what to do. Colin's expression twisted from glee to absolute disbelief. Mom's face darkened, while Dad finally broke away from his conversation, glaring at me like I'd set the table on fire. "Alexa," he hissed, "what's the meaning of this?" But I'd spent my entire life swallowing disappointment. This was a moment I refused to swallow anything. I explained, with forced composure, that I wasn't going to buy acceptance anymore. The waiter, clearly uncomfortable, took the box and said, "Yes, we can process a return, though there might be a restocking fee." He nodded. "That's fine." Chaos erupted. Colin accused me of humiliating him. Mom barked at me. "You're ruining this day for your brother. You could have just given him the gift and left if you wanted to storm off." Dad called me ungrateful, insinuating that after all they'd done for me, I was acting irrational. I stood there, fighting the urge to tremble, and replied, "All you've ever done is demand. You never once showed me the care or celebration you lavish on Colin. Tonight, I decided to let you see what it's like to be left wanting." With that, I walked out. No seat at the table, no family to wave me goodbye, just the sight of their outraged faces reflecting in the glass doors as I left. I felt a strange mix of triumph and heartbreak. I'd never taken such a stand before. I also knew there would be consequences. But in that moment I didn't care. I breathed in the cool Denver night air, stared up at the stars, and whispered to myself, "I'm finally free." I spent the next week ignoring their calls. I needed space. I found refuge in a local cafe near my apartment that stayed open late, where the baristas never asked why my eyes were red from crying, and the soft jazz music soothed me in ways my parents never had. On a rainy Tuesday evening, I took out my phone, saw 21 missed calls from Dad, and turned it off again. I knew a storm was coming. And indeed, it arrived the next weekend, when I heard furious knocking on my apartment door. "Open up, Alexa," Dad's voice boomed. I flinched, but calmly walked to the door. I opened it, finding both Dad and Mom standing there, looking a mix of enraged and anxious. "We need to talk," Dad said, pushing past me into the living room. Mom followed, arms folded across her chest. I shut the door, my heart pounding. This was it, the confrontation. Dad started first, his tone icy. "Your little stunt at Colin's graduation dinner was inexcusable. You humiliated us. Do you realize how that made him feel?" Clenched my jaw. "Try feeling invisible for 20 years, I replied. "Then talk to me about humiliation." Mom cut in. "We've always cared for you, Alexa, but you act like we owe you something. You know how special Colin is, how sensitive he can be. We had to give him more attention. You were always so strong, so independent. I let out a bitter laugh. Being ignored isn't the same as being praised for independence. You never celebrated my successes. You never asked how I felt. All you did was remind me to do something for Colin, day after day. Dad raked a hand through his graying hair, struggling to control his voice. You're exaggerating. We gave you a place to live, paid for your schooling. My scholarship paid most of it, I interrupted. And let's not forget I was working part-time too. Mom's face twitched in annoyance, but I kept going. All my life you demanded that I be perfect, silent and responsible, while Colin could snooze, and you praised me for good reading technique. Don't pretend you don't see the difference. Silence stretched in the wind, broken only by the hiss of traffic outside. Dad muttered, "You had no right to cancel that gift in front of everyone. If you had a problem, you should have talked to us privately." Shrugged. I tried talking a million times, you never listened. This time I made you watch. Mom let out an exasperated breath. Fine. If that's how you feel, then be prepared for consequences. Don't expect us to welcome you back with open arms. My hands trembled, but I steadied my voice. Who said I'm coming back? Dad narrowed his eyes. If you choose to separate yourself from this family, don't expect support when you need it. I stood tall. I don't recall getting much support to begin with. They looked at me like I was a stranger, and in that moment I realized that maybe I was. My father turned to Mom, nodded, and then looked at me with finality. "Then we're done here," he said, walking out. Mom shot me a cold stare, as though I'd just disowned them, then followed him. The door slammed, echoing in my quiet apartment. My chest felt hollow, but also strangely relieved. I'd been cut off from people who never truly included me in the first place. Days turned into weeks. I heard from no one in the family, though I saw glimpses on social media. Photos of Colin with friends, pictures of Mom and Dad traveling to scenic places. It stung that they seemed unbothered, but I also felt a new sense of liberation. With no calls from them, I was free to focus on myself. I rearranged my apartment, bought some potted plants, started cooking better meals, joined a yoga class, and realized that living my own life, without constantly pleasing them, was both refreshing and terrifying. Then, about a month later, the calls started again. Not from Mom or Dad, but from Colin. He left a voicemail one afternoon. "Alexa," he said, voice subdued. I know things have been rough between you and our parents, and maybe some of it's my fault. But I need a favor. I'm trying to get a place downtown, and I need a co-signer for the lease. Could you, help me out? Please call me back." My head spun in disbelief. Even now, after all that, he was asking for help. I considered ignoring him. But curiosity gnawed at me. A few days later I called him back, more out of fascination with his audacity than sisterly affection. He answered on the second ring. "Alexa, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you called," he blurted, relief evident in his tone. "Look, I know you've been upset, but I really need someone to co-sign for this place. It's near my new job, and if I don't get it, I might lose the opportunity. Mom and Dad's credit isn't great right now, and you've always been responsible, so..." I cut him off. "Colin, do you even understand why I walked away? Why I cancelled that gift?" He was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "Look, I get it, you felt underappreciated. But come on, do we really have to make this bigger than it needs to be?" I felt my blood boil at his casual dismissal. Bigger than it needs to be. "Colin, I spent my entire life overshadowed by you, and you think it's just me being dramatic?" He stammered. "That's not what I meant, Maybe you're exaggerating a bit. Mom and Dad love us both, they just worry about me more because I'm, the artistic one." I nearly laughed. "They worry about you more because you've never had to fend for yourself. You've had everything handed to you, including my time and energy. I'm not doing it anymore." Silence hung on the line. Finally, Colin murmured, "So you won't help me?" I exhaled slowly, remembering every frantic text from him or my parents over the years, asking for money, time or chores. "No, I won't," I said. If you need a cosigner, figure it out without me. Grow up. Then I ended the call. I expected anger, or at least some pushback, but days passed with no response. I guess that meant he'd either found someone else or decided to drop the request. Either way, I felt a strange sense of victory. Over the next few months, I poured myself into my job, forming closer friendships with some coworkers. I even confided in my boss, a kind woman who'd faced a similar situation in her own family. She told me, "It's okay to protect your peace, Alexa. Sometimes walking away is the best thing you can do." Those words gave me a sense of comfort, like I wasn't being heartless by refusing to let my parents and brother keep stepping all over me. Summer turned into fall. Leaves changed color, the air cooled, and I discovered a new version of myself. Someone who took long walks through the park on weekends, experimented with painting. Ironically, a hobby I'd never explored since Colin was the artistic one, and found joy in small things. I'd never felt so at ease. Yet, in the back of my mind, I knew my family wasn't done with me. Drama was practically coded into their DNA. I waited for the next shoe to drop, for the next phone call or confrontation. Sure enough, one crisp October evening, I heard a frantic knocking on my door. My heart sank. "Alexa," came a muffled voice. "It's me, Colin. Please open up." I hesitated, then cracked the door open. There he stood, eyes red like he'd been crying. For a moment, I forgot all the resentment and let concern seep in. "What happened?" I asked softly. He stepped inside, shivering in the hallway's draft. "Mom and Dad had to take out a second mortgage to cover some debts," he explained, voice trembling. "They co-signed for me on a lease for a nicer apartment, but I lost my job. Couldn't pay the rent. They stepped in, used the house as collateral for a loan. Now everything's going under. The bank's about to foreclose." I didn't know it would get this bad. I stared at him, stunned, not sure how to respond. He broke down, tears sliding down his cheeks. "Dad's blaming me, Mom's sobbing in her room, saying it's all over. They said maybe Alexa can help. Maybe she has savings, maybe she can fix this." He looked at me, desperation shining in his eyes. "Please, Alexa, I know how it sounds. But I'm asking you, from one sibling to another, could you do something? Talk to the bank, or lend them money so they don't lose the house." My immediate reaction was anger. The house that never felt like home to me, the parents who never treated me like their child, and the brother who just last month accused me of blowing things out of proportion. Now they wanted me to swoop in like a superhero. My jaw tightened. "Colin, you have no idea how many times I needed help, and none of you even asked if I was okay." He nodded rapidly, tears dripping onto his shirt collar. "I'm sorry, I truly am. I was blind to how they treated you. But they're still our parents, Alexa. If they lose the house, they'll have nowhere to go. Could you at least talk to them? Maybe figure out a plan?" My heart pounded. I hated that it all hinged on me. If I turned him away, it meant turning away parents who, despite everything, had provided a roof over my head throughout childhood. Sure, they made me feel invisible, but they were still my family, and losing the house was serious. Yet, if I helped them, I risked falling right back into the old role, giving up my time and money for a situation they partly created by always bailing Colin out. I weighed it all in the span of seconds, while Colin stood there sobbing. Finally, I asked, "Do Mom and Dad even want to see me?" He swallowed, nodding. "Yes, they said they don't know who else to turn to." I agreed to meet them, but on my terms. The next day, we arranged to meet at a quiet coffee shop, one with wide windows, wooden floors, and soft lighting. I arrived early and sat at a corner table, sipping a latte, thinking about all the possible confrontations. My stomach churned when Mom and Dad walked in, looking exhausted. They approached slowly, as if uncertain whether I'd stand up and storm out. I motioned for them to sit. They did, side by side, and a tense silence fell. Mom spoke first, voice trembling with guilt. "Alexa, we're so sorry to bother you. We know things haven't been right between us for a long time." Dad cleared his throat, eyes downcast. "We wouldn't ask if we had another choice. Bank. It's bad. We're months behind on payments, plus the debt from helping Colin. We need around $30,000 to stop the foreclosure. We can't raise that on our own. Mom reached for my hand, but I pulled away gently. I couldn't just forget everything. She tried again. Look, I know we were tough on you, maybe unfair sometimes. I felt my shoulders stiffen at that casual phrasing. Unfair sometimes was an understatement for 2 decades of neglect. Dad sighed. We thought you'd be okay because you were always so responsible. We never meant to make you feel like you weren't important. I took in a slow breath, forcing myself to remain calm. So now you want me to bail you out? I asked, my voice eerily steady. After you told me never to come back if I wasn't going to be a team player for Colin? Dad winced. We said some harsh things, we regret them. But Alexa, please understand this is our home. If we lose it. I stared at him, thinking about all the times that house never felt like mine. Despite the ache in my chest, I said quietly, I'll help, under one condition. The house deed becomes collateral against the loan from me. If you can't pay me back in 2 years, the house is signed over to me. Mom and Dad exchanged horrified looks. You're joking, Mom breathed. No, I'm not, I replied. It's business. I'm not handing out free money, especially to people who treated me as if I were a second-class citizen in that house. If you want my help, I need a guarantee that I won't be left in the cold again. They looked stunned, searching each other's eyes for an answer. Mom shook her head, tears brimming. That's so cruel, Alexa. This is our home. I shrugged, heart pounding. I know. And it was supposed to be mine too, but it never felt that way. You see it as cruelty. I see it as protecting myself. Dad's face hardened. I can't believe you'd do this to your own parents. My voice rose, fed by years of hidden anger. You did this to yourselves. You were the ones who bankrolled Colin's every whim, ignoring me, and now you're paying the price. If you really believe in him, if you believe in the family you supposedly cherish, then sign. Pay me back or I take the house. Silence took over. Mom quietly cried, dabbing tears with a napkin. Dad looked at me, eyes filled with a mixture of shock, regret, and maybe a hint of respect for the spine I'd finally developed. Let us think about it, he said gruffly, then stood up, gently guiding Mom out of the coffee shop. I watched them leave, my latte turning cold. I hated that it had come to this. Me dealing with my own parents like an investor dealing with a risky venture. But for once, I felt I was on equal footing. And I wasn't going to cave in again, no matter how much it hurt. Weeks passed. Carried on with my life. Colin tried calling, wanting to talk me into loosening my demand, but I refused to pick up. I figured if Mom and Dad truly needed me, they'd come to me on my terms. Finally, on a chilly afternoon, I received an email from Dad. He said he and Mom would sign the loan agreement. They enclosed a draft of the contract. My hands shook as I read it. They would accept the $30,000 from me, repayable with minimal interest, but if they defaulted or missed payments for over 3 months, the house would legally become mine. I printed out the papers, read them carefully, had a lawyer friend check them over. Then, with a steadiness I never thought I'd have, I signed. We met at a notary's office. Mom's cheeks were pale, Dad's voice was subdued, and we barely exchanged pleasantries. We all signed in silence. When it was over, they thanked me in low voices, then left. I stood there, contract in hand, heart twisting in conflicting emotions. This was revenge and heartbreak rolled into one. But it gave me a strange sense of closure too. If I'd never counted in that house as a child, I sure counted now. For a few months things were quiet. I occasionally got an email from Mom, updating me on how they were paying smaller chunks of the debt. Dad got a side job doing deliveries in the evenings. Colin apparently found new work at an advertising agency, chipping in where he could. I didn't see them or visit, just kept it businesslike, checking the monthly deposit they made into my account. Then, about 8 months in, the deposit started arriving late, sometimes short. Dad would call, making excuses. The bills are high, we had unexpected repairs, or Colin lost hours at work. Each time I gave him the same answer. Do what you have to do, or risk forfeiting the house. He'd sigh, promise to pay soon, and hang up. I began to wonder if I'd ended up in the role of an emotionless collector, but I remembered how easy it was for them to ignore me all those years. I refused to let guilt unravel my stance. One night, I got home from work to find Colin waiting by my door again, eyes hollow, wearing the same desperate expression I'd seen before. "Alexa, they can't keep up with the payments," he confessed. "Everything is piling up and I know you're serious about the agreement. Is there any way you can lower the amount or extend the timeline? We're drowning here." I studied him in the dim hallway light. For once, he looked truly remorseful, maybe even recognizing how much he'd taken for granted. "Colin," I said softly, "I gave Mom and Dad fair terms. I'm not going to adjust them. That's not my job. If they can't keep the house, that's on them." He sank to the floor, pressing his palms to his forehead. "I get it. I just can't believe it's come to this." I sighed, a lump forming in my throat. "Neither can I, but you all made your choices. Now face them." A few weeks later, Dad sent me a text. "We can't do it anymore. The house is yours. We're moving out." I read it 3 times, absorbing the words. It was happening. My parents, after a lifetime of ignoring me, were losing the place they cherished most. And I was the reason. A swirl of emotions broke inside me. Vindication, guilt, sorrow, relief. I drove to the house the next day to see if they were still there. I found the front door ajar, furniture half moved, boxes scattered on the lawn. Mom was inside packing kitchenware. When she saw me, she burst into tears. "I never thought it would end like this," she sobbed. Dad emerged from the garage, wiping sweat from his brow, and froze upon seeing me. A quiet tension filled the air. I stood by the threshold, remembering my childhood, remembering how that door never felt truly open for me. I asked softly, "What will you do?" Dad shrugged, weary. "We'll rent a small place, maybe out of town. Colin's going with us. We can't afford rent anymore." I glanced around at the echoing rooms, battered by reality. My chest felt tight. I wanted to hate them, but seeing them cornered like this didn't bring the satisfaction I imagined. I said, voice wavering, "You didn't have to let it get this far. You could have tried to treat me better from the start." Dad looked down, exhaling. "I know," he whispered. "Too late now." They finished packing and left that evening, a moving truck rattling down the driveway. I stood on the porch, watching them go, remembering the countless times I'd yearned for their acknowledgement. A strange emptiness settled over me. I was the owner of the house, but I wasn't sure I wanted it. It contained ghosts of a past I spent years trying to escape. Still, it was legally mine, so I spent the next few weekends cleaning out what they left behind. I found old photo albums, scrawled notes about Colin's achievements. Very few pictures of me alone, mostly group shots where I lingered at the edge. Tears blurred my vision as I tossed items in boxes, deciding what to keep and what to discard. In the end, I left behind only faint reminders that I once existed there. Months passed, and I put the house up for sale. I didn't want to rent it out or hold on to that weight. It sold quickly. Decent neighborhood, good structure. I made enough profit to secure my financial future. Yet, ironically, in that profit I found no real triumph. It felt more like concluding a drawn-out war, with scars left on all sides. Then came a moment that changed everything once more. I heard a knock on my apartment door and opened it to find Mom, alone, looking older and more fragile. She stood there in a faded jacket, eyes rimmed with regret. I thought she might lash out, but she simply said, "Alexa, can we talk?" I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. We sat at my small kitchen table in silence for a minute, sipping tea. Finally, Mom spoke, voice trembling. "I know we hurt you. I can't take it back, I can't rewrite the past. But I want you to know that I realized, too late, how unfair we were. You always did well, always overcame obstacles on your own. We took it for granted." I stared into my tea, swirling the liquid. I spent years waiting for you to see me, Mom, I murmured. Years thinking maybe the next achievement would finally make you proud. It never happened. She bowed her head. I was so busy coddling Colin that I forgot I had another child who needed just as much love. I won't blame you if you hate us. You had every right to walk away. You still do. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I'm not asking you for money or help. I came to say, if you ever find it in your heart to forgive, I'm here. I'm sorry for everything, Alexa. The sincerity in her apology shattered something in me. I felt a swirl of relief, sadness, longing. All those years of being invisible, of wanting a mother who cared, pressed in on me. Without warning, tears slid down my own face. In a quiet voice I asked, "What about Dad and Colin?" Mom swallowed. "They're living in a small place a few towns over. Things are tough, but we manage. They're both sorry too in their own ways, though they may not be as brave in admitting it." I nodded, digesting her words. I didn't know if I was ready to see them, but something told me that maybe, just maybe, I could lay down the burden of anger I'd carried for so long. We talked for hours that day about big things and small. For the first time, Mom asked me real questions like what I liked about my job or what I did on weekends. When she left, she hugged me and I let her. It felt awkward because real intimacy between us was so foreign, but it also felt like a door cracked open. Over the following weeks, I received text messages from Dad, apologizing for how everything turned out, saying he hoped we could meet too. I stayed cautious, not wanting to dive right back into old patterns. But I did message him back, acknowledging his words, saying I needed time. Eventually, time led to small steps toward reconciliation. I agreed to meet Dad and Colin at a diner halfway between our towns. I arrived anxious, half expecting an argument or another guilt trip, but they surprised me. Dad looked exhausted, thinner than before, but when he saw me, he offered a small smile. "Alexa," he murmured, "I'm so glad you're here." Colin, across from him, ducked his head. "Hi, sis." I sat, stomach churning. Dad started by explaining how he realized his mistakes in always pushing me aside, how it was never truly about not loving me, but about some misguided need to protect Colin, who they perceived as more vulnerable. "We were blind," he admitted, voice cracking. Colin apologized too, saying he never recognized how I felt, and that my anger at the graduation dinner made him see, in one big jolt, how overlooked I must have been. I listened quietly, arms folded, heart pounding. I told them how lonely it was growing up, how humiliating it felt to have your triumphs overshadowed by someone else's normal accomplishments. We all wiped tears, ignoring the curious glances of the people in nearby booths. By the time I left, I wasn't sure if everything was forgiven, but I felt relief, like a heavy cloak had been lifted from my shoulders. A new path stretched in front of us, uncertain but hopeful. In the months that followed, we built a cautious relationship from scratch. I still had boundaries. I wasn't going to hand out money, or revolve my schedule around them. But we talked on the phone occasionally, texted about birthdays and small updates. Mom and Dad both found modest jobs, scraping by in their new life. Colin started picking up freelance art gigs, determined not to lean on the family. I sold the old house, but I bought a smaller home closer to the city with part of the profit, a place that truly felt like mine. A modern condo with big windows that let in the sunlight I once thought was reserved for people like Colin. I curated every corner of it, learning to love interior decor in a way I never had time for before. One day, about a year later, I invited Mom, Dad, and Colin over for a small gathering. It was the first time I had ever hosted them, and the irony of that wasn't lost on me. They showed up bearing simple gifts. A new mug set for my kitchen, a homemade card with a watercolor painting of the Colorado mountains done by Colin. I was touched. We sat down to dinner. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti, garlic bread, and a salad I threw together. Yet the warmth in the room felt more genuine than anything I'd experienced at that old house. Dad asked me about my current projects at work, actually interested. Mom offered to help wash dishes afterward, and I let her. Colin showed me some sketches he was working on, and I gave him my honest opinions. We laughed a bit, reminiscing about silly childhood moments I'd completely forgotten, like the time Pepper the cat got stuck in a tree and Dad had to climb up to rescue her. There was an ease in the air, fragile but real. When they left that evening, Dad paused at the door, turning to me with a hesitant smile. "Thank you, Alexa, for letting us back in. I know we didn't make it easy. I promise we won't take you for granted again." Believed him cautiously. I nodded and said, "I appreciate it." Mom gave me a hug goodnight, her eyes watery. Colin, with the same expression he had when we were kids, said softly, "I really am sorry for everything." I nodded, "I know," and gently closed the door. My condo felt quiet but not lonely. For the first time I sensed a real chance at healing. Now, looking back, I see that I got my revenge. Not the fiery, dramatic kind, but a deeper one. My parents and brother lost their safety net, the house they'd once refused to share with me emotionally. They learned the hard way that ignoring me came with consequences. Yet along the way, we found a chance for a new beginning. It wasn't about letting them get away with everything. It was about reclaiming my worth and giving them a final choice. Either respect me or lose me forever. In the end, they chose to respect me. And maybe that's a happy ending, one where we all learned a harsh lesson, but came out with a truer bond. These days, I live in that modern condo, soaking in the Colorado sunsets through wide glass windows. Mom and Dad rent a small townhouse a few miles away, and Colin has a modest apartment downtown he pays for himself. We're not the perfect family, not by a long shot. Old habits sometimes resurface, but each time we communicate. They ask about my life, my dreams, and I keep my boundaries firm when needed. Colin calls me at random times just to chat, not to ask for favors. Dad sometimes invites me for a Sunday lunch, and I make sure I'm available only if it suits me, not out of obligation. Mom texts me recipes saying, "Try this, let me know if you like it." Small gestures, but meaningful after a lifetime of silence. I never would have believed years ago that my parents would ever see me as more than just an accessory to Colin. But life has a way of surprising you. Sometimes the shock of losing everything forces people to grow up and see who truly matters. My story might sound dramatic, but that's because it was my reality. For anyone listening or reading, my message is simple. Value yourself enough to walk away if you must, to say, enough, when you're not respected. Your worth isn't measured by how well you can please everyone else. If they genuinely care, they'll find their way to meet you halfway, just like my family eventually did. It might take time, and it may not be the fairy tale ending you expect, but it can still be a happy one. And so, here I am, sitting by the window in my living room, sharing this journey, listening to the soft hum of traffic outside. The sun sets behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. I used to watch sunsets alone, feeling a pang of longing for what I couldn't have. Now I watch them with a sense of peace. My phone buzzes. A message from Colin, a funny meme he wants me to see. I smile, saving it for later. There's no heaviness in my chest, no dread of being asked to sacrifice myself again. I've found my place in the world, one that's not overshadowed by anyone else. If that's not a happy ending, I don't know what is.